Okay, hello and welcome or welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name's Katie. I'm an independent researcher and writer of early American history. I'm especially interested in domestic history, women's work, household rhythms, and women writers, which is why today I'm so excited to be chatting with Sarah Walsh, or maybe better known as Abigail Adams. Sarah, I really can't tell you how excited I've been to talk with you and hear your perspective on all things Abigail, as well as like just reenacting and women's history in the pre-revolutionary and revolutionary era. So thank you so much for being here. Will you just introduce yourself and tell us a bit about you?
Of course, I am delighted to be joining you. Thank you so much for having me on your channel, on your Substack, on your YouTube, all the places. I am a librarian, I'm a teacher, and living history was not kind of in the plans. I kind of fell into it. Um, my husband was the one who introduced me to the musical 1776. And we started watching it. It became, an annual tradition. We loved the John and Abigail story. This was actually when we were living in Boston. We lived in Boston for 5 years after I graduated from college, and none of the sort of living history stuff was on my radar. And I'm kicking myself constantly that it wasn't when we were actually living there and on the spot where all of these things happened, right? So fast forward to when we were living in Washington State, I co-produced and played Abigail in a production of 1776. And the big kind of revolutionary, if you will, thing about that production was it was all women and non-binary actors. And
Wow.
so opening up these iconic founding fathers, statesmen and everything to actors who otherwise wouldn't have had a chance to play them. And I think we did the first kind of fully staged production that had that casting, which was pretty cool. And then the costume that was made for me for that show, I wore it the next year to a reenactment event in like northern Washington State and met a bunch of the reenactors there, including Franklin, Adams, Washington, all of them. And the person portraying John Adams said, "Oh, well, if you've done Abigail in the show, then I bet you could do Abigail in Living History." And I said, "Are you sure? Because there's a big difference between playing a person on stage with a very specific interpretation of that person, the script and all of that, and ad-libbing and becoming this person." And he said, "I think you can do this." So my first opportunity to try was November of 2016. And I did that same event that I had been to, or no, in 2016, I did it was Rebels in Redcoats in Arizona.
Hmm.
So we moved to the DC area, and I've been kind of portraying Abigail anywhere they'll have me, really, at this point. So this is, yeah, now it's almost 10 years that I've been doing this, and that's
Wow.
kind of crazy.
That's amazing. I lived in Boston for several years also after graduating college. And would always, I studied history, and so I would always go to all the different historic sites and see these people doing reenacting, and I was just like, how do you how do you get into that? Do you just like, is that a regular job you can just apply for, or like do you have to have the clothes? Do you make your own clothes? How does this work? So that's so interesting that you kind of fell into it.
Yeah, it was very much a sideways, entry point because I mean, it was not the sort of thing that I would have ever thought I would get into. And I was an English major. I did a lot of music. But I've been sewing all my life. And, my mom would say, it's a very different kind of sewing I'd been doing all my life. I learned to use a sewing machine and make things from patterns. Oh, that's one of my cats. Um, and, so starting the process of, not all historical reenactors make their own clothes. Some people commission things, some people buy things, some people, um, you know, do things. It depends on the site, right? It really depends on what their kind of some places have really, really strict standards for accuracy, and some places are a little bit more, the exterior, everything looks good, and every place is going to be different as to what they kind of prioritize. But I decided, you know what? I want to learn how to make the clothes and how to fit the clothes and how to stitch and, do all of that. Um, but yeah, again, it never, it was not the sort of thing like when I grow up, I want to do this. But I have heard a lot of people, they went to Colonial Williamsburg for the first time and they go, that's what I want to do.
Mm, yeah.
Um, so yeah, it kind of ended up finding me.
Hmm.
And I mean, yeah, Abigail Adams is this just fascinating figure who we know a lot about thanks to John Adams preserving all of the family letters. But kind of getting into her head is a whole different thing.
Yeah, I have questions about that. I'm first curious though. Okay, two questions. The first one is for subscribers who may be new to living history,
Mhm.
what what is like first person interpretation in a nutshell? Like what does it allow an audience to feel or to understand that maybe a lecture can't?
It really is intended to be immersive. So you are meeting this historical figure. They're standing in front of you, talking to you, doing whatever it is, doing a trade or making cloth or whatever it may be. They are doing that thing and they are embodying that historical figure. And sometimes it's a historical figure, a real historical figure. Sometimes it's kind of an amalgamation of people.
Mhm.
Like if we don't know a certain person's name, but we know their trade or we know some things about them, it might be, a persona that a living historian has kind of put together. But yeah, that's the idea, is that you're really actually talking to that person. And I actually had someone say to me once, oh my gosh, I've been wanting to meet you my whole life as Abigail.
Oh,
It's it's very flattering to sort of be able to give people that experience. And it's
yeah.
it's a it's a big responsibility too.
I was going to ask, does that feel like a lot of pressure?
Yes. Because a lot of people who, they want to meet this person, they want to get a chance to talk to them, they already know a lot. So, I need to make sure I know what I need to know in order to then give them that immersive experience.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I can imagine that would feel like a lot of responsibility, like you
Yeah.
said. Um, what made you want to stay with Abigail now for going on 10 years? Like what was it about her that you were like, that's my gal?
I think part of it is just that there's so much to go on. There's so much known about her life. There's so much known about her internal thoughts because we have not just the letters that she and John wrote to each other, but in the times when she and John were together and not writing to each other, we've got letters she wrote to her sisters and to her nieces and to her sons and her daughter. And so the family record is really, really complete in a lot of ways. And that that gives you a lot to go on. That gives you a lot of information, that gives you a lot of insight into how best to portray her, right? That kind of provides um, a broad array of options for how, what to talk about. There's so much, right? There's so many things that you can kind of dive down that rabbit hole on. And it really is also, their relationship is so sweet. I mean, they were a love match. It was, in spite of her family's um, misgivings about him just kind of being this country lawyer who was not, he didn't seem like he had a lot of promise.
Just what
And
they knew.
and so, they, the longevity of their relationship, the dedication of them to each other over huge distances and long stretches of time, they were deeply in love. And the circumstances of how much they had to be apart, that affection never wavered. I mean, it's palpable. And, having again, like sort of come to their story through 1776, I knew that the letters were a big part of how that show was shaped, right? Their
Mm.
letters, really form a lot of like the dialogue and the songs between them and everything. But I didn't know until I was looking through the letters for something completely different, and I came across a letter from like 1780 something where John actually signed it. I am as I ever was, yours, yours, yours.
Mm.
And I burst into tears because I didn't even realize that that refrain came straight out of the letters. I thought it was kind of just, the
For
songwriters,
the show.
right. And I was just
Mm.
blown away that, yes, these sentiments were very real and very much expressed in their correspondence to each other. So it's really, it's that um they weren't just, a political um they weren't just political figureheads. They were people, and we know so much about not just them, but about their relationship and about their love for each other and about you know, their thoughts about what was happening in the world. And John knew, he really knew that they were living through extraordinary times.
Hmm.
And he really conveyed that. And even though she said to him in the letters multiple times, you know, burn this letter, destroy this letter, don't let anyone see this letter, make sure this letter doesn't see the light of day ever again.
Yeah.
We have them. So,
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that was so forward thinking of
mhm.
him to keep all of this. I mean,
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
invaluable.
I'm just gonna tip that down a little bit. There we go.
Um, was there any specific letter or like a season of her life where you thought like this is the work I really want to do? Anything that was like your favorite that really sticks out?
Oh, I love the letters from I love the time that they spent in Europe.
Mm.
Um, the, I've been kind of working to have clothing for all the different periods in her life, like times when, she's kind of just the wife of a lawyer farmer, and then, the diplomatic years, the presidential years, all of that. And their time in Europe is fascinating to me. I mean, the amount of just the way she writes these incredibly long letters to her sisters back home to like tell them what she's been seeing and experiencing in London and in Paris. And she goes into just massive amounts of detail about the architecture. And she went to see Handel's Messiah, and
Mm.
she saw a procession for, there was a prince's birthday, and then there was a thing mourning a prince, and there was all these, just experiences that she never thought she couldn't have even conceived of having these experiences when she was a little girl, right? And just the fact that she made this journey, which was miserable, crossing the ocean because she wanted to be with her husband. And, he had been begging her to come for years.
Yeah.
Um, bring Nabby, bring John Quincy. I want them to see these places. I want them to meet these people. I want you to see these places with me. I need you here. I miss you terribly. You're so far away. Come, join me. And she finally did. And um it it blew her mind. There was like all of these, just the extravagance and the over the top, the courtly life and all of that. And she was not happy about how much money she had to spend on appearances when they were in Europe. It was expensive. Um, but I think that's my favorite period of their life together, their correspondence. It was the only time they were together for an actual stretch of time. They both had to leave the country to be together.
Yeah. Oh, that's so funny.
I mean, it's just kind of, the yeah, she was, more complimentary about some parts of her time in Europe than others, but and her opinions on all of it. She was very much, Massachusetts girl, not kind of wanting to put on all these silks and bonnets
Hmm.
and run around with, hobnobbing. But she did appreciate the ability of, kind of there was a lot of mixing of nations and ideas and thought and everything that she hadn't had a chance to experience before. And she was like, wow, the women here are, rather free with their expressions of friendship. But I think she really was, I think, daunted by it at first, and then kind of, oh, I can see plays and hear music and, just all these experiences that she'd never even dreamed of having. So,
Hmm.
yeah, I think that's my favorite like moment in her life is those years in Europe.
Yeah. Yeah, I can see that. I mean, just being able to read about European culture through that kind of lens is
Yeah.
really special.
Yeah. And seeing we just deposed, we have separated ourselves from the king. We are now an independent nation, and now having to kind of make nice with
Yeah.
with British royalty. And that had to be an interesting experience to sort of be, I mean, some of the things John had said about King George were not complimentary at all. Um, but they were now sort of partnering with England and becoming allies. And it's a very a strange, metamorphosis to go through.
Yeah. Yeah, to really get that view of diplomacy and what that would
Yeah.
have looked like at the time, and not just a male perspective, but from a very prolific female perspective.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I can see why that would be your favorite. Um, what I'm curious, I mean, there are lots of traits about Abigail to admire. I'm
Hmm.
curious which ones you think may have been more misunderstood or sort of flattened through the
Yeah,
centuries.
I think, and again, this is something that comes up a lot in her letters from the time in Europe. They saw the play Othello performed in London, or was it? Yeah, in London. And, of course, they were seeing an actor in blackface. And she admitted in her letter that seeing the actor in blackface touching Desdemona and like all of the sort of, you know, the pair of them being lovers, being intimate, that gave her kind of, you know, the ick. And she writes about slavery, and she writes about the people her family enslaved when she was growing up, and she believed in freedom for enslaved people. She did not think that slavery should ever have been allowed in the colonies in the United States. I mean, she said very clearly, we call ourselves you know, we want to be free, we want liberty, but we're denying it to an entire race of people, you know. But there was still internalized racism. There was still, you know, just the unshakable concept that yes, there are people who are better than other people. We just also shouldn't be subjecting them to slavery. So I think like her, you know, her thoughts on abolition are very clear. But it's also very clear that people in the 18th century were racist,
Hmm.
you know?
Yeah. Did she did she express like any guilt about feeling that way, or in the letters
Yes.
was she just like, this is how I
No,
feel
she
about this?
talks about, yeah, she talks about kind of, you know, I noticed that, you know, I felt kind of that something, I think it reviled me or something. And
Mm,
she definitely says like this I didn't like this feeling that it was giving me of, you know, I didn't like the feeling that it was making me, how am I cannot find the right words to say this. Yeah, she says in the letter like I'm you know, she's basically saying I'm noticing that it made me shudder and I didn't know quite what to do with that. Yeah.
okay. So
Yeah.
she is like talking about her conflicted feelings in this
Yeah.
moment of like,
Yeah.
I know fully that slavery is wrong and was very um anti-slavery as an institution, but then
Yeah.
was having these feelings and didn't really know what to do with those feelings.
Yeah. Yeah. And there was
Interesting.
when I think it was when they were, I'm gonna have to look at this again, but there was a school that was being established in their parish, and there was a black child, a black little boy who wanted to attend the school, and some of the other families were keeping their children home rather than have them go to school with him. And she marched herself over to the schoolhouse and said, you know, why can't he go to school? You know, and the schoolmaster says, well, the other families really don't want him to. And she said, but he's just as smart, just as capable as the other children. That isn't fair. You know, so
Mm-hmm.
again, like she had, you know, she contained both this kind of bias and also the sense that it's still not right to separate and subjugate people regardless. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, really just um, interesting internal conflict. Yeah.
Yeah. I appreciate um I think it's happening more and more, but I think,
Mhm.
we have this whole like mythology around early America and the
Yeah.
Revolutionary War and who our heroes were and who the good guys were and the bad guys. And I think it's such a valuable conversation to be able to talk about like the nuance in these people
Yes.
and that like their beliefs, they had their beliefs and like all of their actions and thoughts did not always align with those beliefs. And that's a really helpful thing to talk about because humans are flawed and
Yeah.
these people were just as flawed as the rest of us.
Well, and also, I mean, you know, this myth persists that there wasn't slavery in the northern colonies.
Mm-hmm.
And there absolutely was. It was not plantation slavery, it was not the same scale, but people were owning other people in the northern colonies as well as in the southern. And one of the cases where a an enslaved person in Massachusetts, Elizabeth, she went by Mumbet,
Oh, Elizabeth
and
Freeman.
yeah, Elizabeth Freeman, and she sued for her freedom based on the Massachusetts Constitution that said all people are created free and all people are created equal. And she was like, well, how is this? How can you square this, right? And she won.
Yep.
So, you know, there's there were these kind of, inklings of how people were like just looking at themselves and going, wait a second,
Yeah.
what
Yeah.
are
And I
we
mean,
really doing?
yeah, and it is much easier to look back and see things as black and white and north
Yeah,
and south, and then these very like clear dividing lines, which just doesn't exist in the world.
yeah,
So that's a really interesting moment with Abigail to have her also be reflecting on her own feelings about it when
yeah.
she knows what she thinks about it. Oh, fascinating. Um, I'm curious what you learned about her voice after having 10 years with the letters and
Mhm.
with her. Um, what about like what did you learn about her writing voice and her thinking voice and the way she portrays herself in her letters?
That's interesting. I think she she had a very clear she I mean she was essentially got education as best she could, right? There was no schooling really for girls. Um, her father provided lots of books and, tutors, and her grandmother especially was really instrumental in providing her
Mm.
with, really anything she wanted in terms of books and information and learning and all that. Um, and, in her letters, she's quoting the Bible, she's quoting poetry, she's quoting literature, she's quoting Milton. She wants, she's matching wits with John, right? It's very important, I think, to her that, we know each other well enough to have this kind of banter, to have this back and forth. And I can meet you where you are, right? I can, quote with the best of them. If you have arguments you want to make, I can bring in, 10 more to tell you what I think. And John really valued that. He valued her intelligence, he valued her intellect as not just, managing the farm and the family and all of that, but with, he would kind of bounce political ideas off of her and,
Hmm.
share what was going on with, you know, the Congress and with, all of these male dominated spaces that he was involved in. She would share what she was hearing from neighbors and friends in the newspapers. And, it was really important to her to be on top of these things so that she could discuss them intelligently with him.
Hmm.
And I think that, the letters were, of course, you know, sending their affection and sending their, professions of constancy and everything, but it really also was they wanted to have, they wanted to continue their conversations as well as you possibly could, right? Anything that,
Yeah.
anything that they would have said to each other, they would put in a letter. There were very few things I think that you know, she even wrote him a letter while she was in labor. I mean, like there were, these were it was important to her to be sharing what she was going through and what was happening all the time. I mean,
Yeah.
they would say to each other, do not miss an opportunity of writing. Don't miss the post. Like, make sure you
Hmm.
have a letter ready to go when the post comes so that you can, keep me informed and I can keep you informed. It was very it wasn't just, hey, how are you? How's things going? I mean, the correspondence was really it sounds hackneyed, but the meeting of souls. It was how
Yeah.
they you know shared about the day to day as well as global events.
Yeah, yeah, I love how in their letters they really invite each other into like their inner worlds and their thoughts about what's going on, and not just like the day to day, this happened and that happened. It's more like
Yeah.
what they're actually experiencing
Yeah.
while they're away from one
Yeah.
another.
And that's the thing. There's a lot of, that inner sort of, you wouldn't get those conversations if they hadn't been apart so much.
Hmm.
We would not have this record of their most intimate thoughts that they shared with each other unless, he was gone all the time.
Yeah.
So, in the moment, I'm sure it was incredibly frustrating and, um, and they clearly missed each other very much. But I mean, those absences have given us, such a gift in terms of that, you know, the depth of their, um, expressions of, again, as you said, like both their deepest thoughts and also just, hey, it costs such and such now to buy pins, right? Like there's all of that is in there.
Yeah. Yeah. Speaking of pins, I love the line in your Instagram bio, which I'm just going to read for people listening or watching. It says Abigail Adams asked John for women's representation, an end to slavery, and pins. He sent pins. And it's funny. I mean, it's funny, but it's also really telling.
Yeah.
And I'm curious what do you think that exchange reveals about what Abigail understood to be at stake?
I think he did what he could, right? I mean, she sent him these letters lamenting, the fact that women had no voice and couldn't vote and didn't have representation. And she, says we can't be going on like this, depriving people of liberty when we want it so fervently ourselves. But he was only one person in this body of legislators. And these were, the private letters to her husband. It was, you've got some influence with these people. I implore you to use it if you can. But I think she also understood that there was just so much they were trying to figure out. It was the movements of the armies. It was, are there enough shirts for our soldiers? Are we inoculating for smallpox? Are we not? Like all of these different things that were going on during war. And she's like, there's going to be new laws, right? And maybe you can do this, And I think she felt very strongly about it, but I think it was also like, if this can go on your very long list of to-dos,
Yeah.
that would be fantastic, And he's always talking about having, a million cares on his mind and all these things, but pins I can do.
Can check that off the list.
I got you. So in the
Oh.
grand scheme of things, yes, women needed the vote and also women needed pins.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it reveals too like what John could really hear and could really do something immediately about. Like you said, it's like I have all these cares. I don't know how we're going to fund the army. I don't know how we're going to make sure they all have clothing, but I can get you those pins.
And it's sort of the, it's also he recognized that the war was causing all these shortages and it was like I can relieve this need, right? It was,
Mhm.
this is something that um I can control, I can help with, and it he did not live to see slavery end or women get the vote. Neither of them did. So it's, it's sort of like we know looking back just how long a slog, it was not just a matter of stand up in the Congress and say, we need to do this and it's done, right? And both of them knew that,
Yeah.
um, both of them knew that all too well. Um, but it's again, it's these kind of, these moving the needle, right? Just as in whatever way you can. Um, and there was, again, there was just only so much that could be done with a Congress that, you know, had not really been empowered to act in a decisive way. They were
Hmm.
all, this sort of ragtag, you send your three guys, we'll send our three guys, and we'll see what we can do.
Yeah. Yeah, and all of those the different colonies had different needs.
Yeah.
And it seems like that line in itself about what she asked for, what he was able to send, I think it also like it shows us that they really had to trust that they were laying a foundation for hope that like at some point this would be a great nation. And right
Yeah.
now we can only do what we can do, and
Right.
it's going to take generations of
Yeah.
hopefully this working out.
Yeah, it really was. It was, if we can get to the point where we are united and we are established, and, that's the goal right now. We have to kind of laser focus on that. Um, and some things are going to have to fall by the wayside, essentially,
Hmm. Yeah.
Um, and it, yeah, it was incredibly frustrating, especially for her to see that New Jersey, I think in 1787 or so, um, New Jersey women had the vote, and then it got taken away.
Yes.
And,
Yes.
and she wrote, she's like, if I had lived in New Jersey, you best believe I would have been first in line. And there were like these two steps forward, three steps back. It was,
Hmm.
just seeing that happening must have just been infuriating.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Yeah. And wonder like you got this, then it was taken away. Like, are we ever going to get this back? What's it going to
Yeah.
take now? Yeah. Um, I'm curious, speaking of women in that period, what role do you think Abigail played in the lives of the other women around her, some of whom we have letters of their correspondence?
Yeah.
And do you think that Abigail, because of the way she has shaped our historical record, has also shaped the way we imagine Revolutionary era women?
Oh, I absolutely think so. I mean, the correspondence with Mercy Otis Warren, with Catherine Macaulay in England. I mean, she was sharing ideas and, thinking about these questions of, this is a big step to say we are no longer going to be British subjects. We are going to be our own nation. Um, and the women who would organize to, you know, there was a coffee merchant or something. They just like ran him out of town because he was charging too much. And there were, the boycotts essentially of British imported goods and the Tea Party, obviously, and, you know, any way that women could impact what was going on, in the domestic sphere. They're the ones buying material. They're the ones buying
Mhm.
food. They're the ones buying, household provisions. And I don't know that Abigail was like at the front of the line, with her, rake and hoe and, all that, like running the coffee merchant out of town. But I think she felt very strongly that women had a great deal of influence and a great deal of power in
Mhm.
terms of the almighty dollar. I mean, if no one's buying your fancy imported silks, then they just sit, rotting in the harbor, right? So, um, that the men were legislating and the women were negotiating and economizing and deciding how they were going to make the most impact in their sphere, right? And I think, I don't, like I said, I don't think she's, leading these meetings, but she's very much commenting on, she's commenting proudly in her letters about these practices that women were taking on of, only using homespun or making
Mm-hmm.
Liberty tea or whatever it might be. She's really fervent in her support of what women can do within their own sphere.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think that, that impact, she felt that very strongly, and she felt very strongly that women should do everything they could do. Hello.
Mm-hmm.
Go on. Go, 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 go. No.
Um, yeah, there's a great, I don't know if you've seen the Adams HBO series.
You know what? I actually haven't.
So I only started watching it recently. I've only seen the first 2 or 3 episodes, but there's this one line in it where John and Abigail are together. It's like he came home after the first Continental Congress or something like that. So
Yeah.
it's very early on. And they're talking about politics.
Hmm.
And she's pushing him for doing what she believes is the right thing. And he says something like, "Oh, it's politics, Abigail." And she's like, she gives him this little mini speech about like how she's at home doing these everyday things like buying cloth, like buying tea, like deciding how the household runs at this really pivotal time. And she's like, that is politics. Like, I live
Yeah.
politics. And I thought that was such a great way to show how I imagine she views her role at
Yeah.
the time.
Yeah. And she believed very strongly that, you know, women had a role, had that sort of domestic management role, and that they also needed to be educated well enough in order to do that, in order to then educate their own
Mm-hmm.
children and participate in these conversations about what was going on in the world. Because, yeah, everything is political, everything is personal. And you know, if women are just kind of shunted to the side, oh, little lady, that's not for you, you're not winning any hearts there, right? So, I think she was very much, reminding John, like, even if this is our sphere, we still need to be, we need the tools to manage it well. If a woman can't do math, she can't manage finances. If a woman doesn't know business terms, like especially because, she's not the only one managing the household and the farm completely by herself. Women whose husbands are in the army or in the navy or whatever it might be, this is now becoming part of a woman's role,
Mm-hmm.
and they need to be savvy, right? They need to be instructed in how best to do that.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's, she felt very strongly, I'm not about to go stand in the middle of the street and, rally for women's rights, but it's women still need rights, and,
Mm-hmm.
there's no reason to deny them those rights.
Mm-hmm.
We're just as clever, we're just as smart if you just give us a chance, right?
Yeah. 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 I think she does a good job. I think in that portrayal, at least of John, he still sees like the spheres very separately.
Yeah,
And her whole point, which I think she makes so beautifully, is that like our spheres aren't separate. Like all of the
right.
things that impact you still impact me and
Yeah.
the kids and like everybody else here. Like you're just the one over there negotiating. So you need
Yeah.
to keep in mind all the rest of us because we're the ones that are feeling the impact.
Yeah, absolutely.
Um, how do you prepare yourself to step into her role? Like I know I clearly you've done like a ton of research But like, how do you start to embody that, like the voice, the posture, the like emotional register?
It's very much kind of it's that process of, and it's been building over years with the wardrobe and the hair and the shoes and all of those things. I have better posture when I'm wearing my stays. It's like I feel taller. I feel, like I'm stepping literally into the embodiment of an 18th century person with all of the underpinnings and the accessories and the hair, all of it, right? And most recently, it's been literally the voice, like the at first when I was doing this early on, I didn't do much to change how I was speaking
Mm,
beyond kind of giving it an elevated, more theatrical aspect.
hmm.
But during lockdown, actually, I started working with a dialect architect, not a dialect coach, a dialect architect. His name is Christopher Davis, and he used to work at the Tea Party and
Oh,
Ships,
cool.
yeah, Boston Tea Party Museum. And he kind of got to thinking, like, I'm doing first person interpretation. I'm portraying a person from the past, but I sound like me in the modern day. What would these people have sounded like? And he kind of just started studying this on a kind of, you know, deep dive. Not, he's not an academic in this field, but he's been studying it for so long. He's really an expert in figuring out how people of the past might have sounded. I mean, he's using elocution guides and dictionaries and rhetoric,
Hmm.
you know, rhetoric books and everything about, the ways that people were being instructed to speak, which gives you a hint as to if they say, don't say it this way because you'll sound like a country bumpkin, then you kind of get a sense of how people generally sounded and how they would pronounce things.
Hmm.
And so I mean, I've been studying with him for years. I mean, I started working with him I think in 2020, and really like delving into not just their letters but other, documents from the time, newspapers, all of these things to figure out how someone from New England in the 18th century would actually sound. And that was kind of the last piece for me of really being
Hmm.
able to feel like I can actually embody Abigail. If I can, the first time I read one of her letters in this voice that we developed, I started crying because it felt like she was speaking through me.
Yeah.
It was incredibly moving. And the, the nuances of kind of the mishmash of accents that were, you know, mixing up in New England. Um, Sometimes it sounds kind of piratey, sometimes it sounds sort of modern day Boston, sometimes it's
Hmm.
Cornish. I mean, it's a little bit of everything. And it's been fascinating to add that to my portrayal of, yes, I have the shoes, I have the stays, I have the dress, I have the cap, I have all of these things. But really everything, and we talked about this, we now do a podcast. So we started a podcast talking about specifically John and Abigail's letters and
Oh.
this kind of 18th century New England dialect that we've been working on. There are a lot of clues in their letters to how they would have said certain things. And there's just this sort of very, I mean, everything in the 18th century was oral, was spoken, right? There's very little about how we kind of interact with the 18th century that is verbalized.
Hmm.
We read the letters or we, listen to, or we watch a movie about it or we, you know, maybe, there's plays and all of these things that have taken the letters or the world of the 18th century into the present day, but capturing that sense of just everything being spoken and nothing being just kind of read in isolation.
Yeah.
Family letters, when you get a letter, you gather everybody around and you read it out loud. You go to a sermon, you hear, the town crier, a pamphlet is read from, the state house. People are arguing and bickering about politics. There's just constant speech around you. And we don't have a sense of now kind of what that would have sounded like. Um, and, reading the letters just in a book or, online or whatever doesn't capture the essence of kind of how the letters reflect speech
Oh,
and
yeah.
also how the letters would have been audible, would have been spoken, would have been, made part of conversation. And the way that people were writing letters in, the 17th, 18th, 19th centuries is very conversational. It's
Hmm.
very much as if the person was in the room. Here's what I would say.
Yeah.
Um, and that kind of conversational aspect to it is enhanced when you can actually bring the letters to life using the kind of dialect that they would have sounded like in the 18th century. So that piece has really been kind of what um that's just the like the pinnacle for me of making this portrayal feel real.
Yeah. Yeah, that sounds amazing. I can see how the voice would really bring it all together and bring her to life and make, seeing a modern day person in historic dress is very different than hearing a modern day person speaking as if
Yeah.
they were someone from the 18th century.
Yeah. It
So that
really
would
makes a
feel really
difference.
different. Yeah.
Yeah. And at first I think people kind of go, "Oh, what is this?" Um,
Yeah.
and a couple of times that I've done programs, people have gone, "You changed your accent a lot." What is that? And because it's not something they really ever would have heard. I mean, people know RP, right? They know British, they know,
Yeah.
you know, a couple of other accents maybe that they can kind of go, okay, yeah, I know what that is, but it really doesn't sound like anything I'd ever heard before. It's
Yeah. Would you give us an
sure.
example?
You want me to, yeah, let me pull up, I will pull up the letter.
Okay.
Let me see. This may take a sec. So if you want
That's
to
okay.
edit this out later. Um, I long to hear that you have declared an independency. And by the way, in the new code of laws, which I suppose it will be necessary for you to make, I desire you would remember the ladies and be more generous and favorable to them than your ancestors. Do not put such unlimited power into the hands of the husbands. Remember, all men would be tyrants if they could. If particular care and attention is not paid to the ladies, we are determined to foment a rebellion and will not hold ourselves bound by any laws in which we have no voice or representation. That your sex are naturally tyrannical is a truth so thoroughly established as to admit of no dispute. But such of you as wish to be happy willingly give up the harsh title of master for the more tender and endearing one of friend. Why then not put it out of the power of the vicious and the lawless to use us with cruelty and indignity with impunity? Men of sense in all ages abhor those customs which treat us only as the vassals of your sex. Regard us then as beings placed by Providence under your protection, and in imitation of the Supreme Being, make use of that power only for our happiness.
Wow. That is crazy. That's amazing that you can do that.
It really, it is like nothing I've ever had to learn or get my mouth around. It's,
That's amazing. It's like a little bit of British and a little bit
yeah,
of like Irish and a
right?
little bit, yeah. It's like you
It's,
can, I think it's really cool though that you can see how there was an evolution of like British accent to like what could be modern American
yeah.
now.
And there's some of those decidedly, very Boston, the wide AR, but there's also, you know, by and I and what?
Oh my gosh, that was great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, it's my parlor trick.
I love it. Um, okay, I want to ask about dress in particular, and then I want to hear about the project that you have going on this summer.
Yeah.
Um, what do you wish people knew about 18th century dress as like identity and labor?
So the most important thing is that everybody was involved in the fitting and the wearing of clothing. And there's very little that was just kind of made for anybody, right? There's clothing was made to a person's body in general. Um, so there was not just you pull a pair of breeches off a rack. Um, every gown, every coat, every pair of breeches, every pair of stays, um, a person would be there with a tailor or a dressmaker, and they'd be, you know, draping fabric onto you, pinning, stitching, you were very much involved in every aspect of wearing clothing. Um, enslaved clothing was a little bit different, but they were still making clothes for a particular purpose and a particular body in a lot of
Mm,
ways. Um, and some things, I mean, depending on, there were some enslaved individuals who did wear like livery and they wore, clothing for work inside the house as opposed to outside the house. And, it would vary as to quality and fit, but just about everybody would have had clothes made to fit their specific body. So there weren't sizes, there weren't, you know, it wasn't like you had to go and get something altered to fit you. It was made to fit you.
yeah.
And the expense of the fabric was that was the investment. Um, you would buy material, have it made into a gown or a coat or whatever, and then once it was out of fashion or you no longer fit it or it needed changes made to it, you would preserve that textile to the very best of your ability, whether it was then handed off to somebody else to then have fitted to them or made into multiple, other garments for children or made into a couch or a set of chairs or whatever. The fabric, the fabric's usability was paramount. That was, that's the that's the wealth of a lot of people was just the clothes that they
Mm,
owned.
hmm.
Um, and I think the the part of it that really kind of that I learned about when I was studying to prepare for a talk I gave last year at the Genesee Country Village and Museum Spring Fashion Symposium is
Mm,
that clothing and textiles were kind of in a separate category from other belongings. So women had no right to property once they married. But their clothing and textiles, which they had either made or had bought, whatever it was, were kind of in a different category of ownership. Women and enslaved people had property rights to clothing and textiles that, you know, other items, money, land, all of that, you know, was not their own. But clothing
Mm,
held a different kind of, it was sort of this outside of the law.
yeah.
But very often asserted in court as an item or a wardrobe or whatever that belonged to this person, to this woman or this enslaved individual. Um, so clothing was a much more um, it was a much more personal thing. I think we think now of clothes as, I like that sweater, I'll get it. I like
Yeah.
that pair of pants. I need a pair of jeans, I'll just, go ahead and buy them. But there was a lot more thought and intention put into clothing, and a lot of personality and a lot of, you had sort of control over what you put on your body
Hmm.
and a lot of leeway in terms of, I don't like this fashion, I like this one. Please incorporate it into, because you're paying the tailor or
Right.
the dressmaker to, you know, make the thing that you want them to make. Um, but there was a great deal more just involvement by people of all echelons of society in the wearing and fitting and using and reusing and refashioning of clothing. Um, that I think, we people see things in museums and they go, "Oh man, that's a gorgeous dress," or "Oh, this velvet, this silk, this whatever." But it's uncoupled from the people who wore them.
Yeah.
And, there's what is it? There's an exhibit, I don't know if it's coming out right now or like soon at the Rijksmuseum showing the wear and tear on clothing,
Oh,
which is kind of like you know, the remnants of, not the remnants, but the evidence of the body that wore it, right? Where,
yeah.
there's sweat stains and there's, a little tear where someone always used to hang their watch chain or whatever, like the things that you would sometimes go, oh, that shouldn't be displayed because it's not pristine, but it's that like unpristine nature of these clothes that really show how they were worn and how wearing them changed the nature of the garments, which
Yeah. And
I
it's
wish
like,
I could go see this exhibit.
I know that sounds amazing. It, you said that when you see dresses or something like that in a museum, it is uncoupled from the person who owned it. But in a way, like because clothing was so individual,
Yeah.
I mean, you can't really uncouple it from the person who wore it. Like the
Yeah,
clothing itself can tell us so much about that specific individual.
it's true. And I mean, what I was talking about was really that we're removed from seeing
Yeah.
the clothes as worn items, right? We're seeing
Yeah.
them on a mannequin, we're seeing them in static. They're not moving, they're not being, worn as someone walks by. But you're absolutely right. I mean, even if we don't know who owned a garment, we know a lot about the person who wore it, right? We can tell a lot. Sometimes you can see like a seam is ever so slightly adjusted because bodies aren't symmetrical, but they wanted to make a gown look symmetrical. So they would kind of adjust here and there. Yeah, there's a lot that those individually fitted garments can tell you. But yeah, you're not seeing the body in the clothes, right? You're
Right.
seeing the ghost in the clothes kind
Right.
of.
Yeah, it's static. We're not seeing it in
Yeah.
motion and how,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, I can definitely see that. Um, will you tell us a bit about the project you have going this summer that
Yeah.
you were sharing a little bit
So,
before we started?
yeah. So this is a project that's been in the works since 2020 was the very first kind of spark I had of this idea. So, lockdown, I was just doing a bunch of like research and kind of searching around the internet, just kind of like, gosh, I wonder how many of Abigail Adams' own belongings are in various museums and collections and everything. And I found at the Haverhill Historical Society, which is also called the Buttonwoods Museum, a gown in their collection that purportedly belonged to Abigail Adams. It passed down through the family of Abigail's sister Mary and was donated by Mary's great, 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 great granddaughter, I think, in 1944. And the family lore states that Abigail sent the dress to Mary when Abigail was in London on diplomatic mission with John. And the gown is like a silk damask. It's got a cream background with green kind of grape leaf motifs, and some sort of floral, additional, what's it called? Additional float threads in
Mm,
peach and blue and pink and red and brown. And the style of the motifs, it's kind of in that chinoiserie mode. And I think the fabric is actually from like the 1740s or so.
wow.
And it's been altered a number of times as it's been, passed down and, remade and refashioned. So I first discovered that this gown was in existence in 2020. It's been on exhibit in the Smithsonian when they did like a First Ladies, you know, clothing exhibit.
Yeah.
Um, but like before I was born, I think. And in 2022, I first got a chance to visit the museum, see the gown. It was uncrated. We looked at it. I took a whole bunch of pictures of it. And the curator at the time was saying, the gown is getting kind of fragile. I would love it if someone could make a replica of it that we could actually display. Do you know anybody who could do that? I said, uh,
Me.
I could do that. And it kind of, the project gained a little bit of momentum. And then in 2024, I went and actually tried to take a pattern of the bodice and, lay it out and figure out kind of exactly the shapes of, all the different components. And now finally this summer, a group of other historical sewists, and I are going to go to the museum and do a week-long, well, 5-day, dressmaking demonstration to make the replica gown. So
Wow.
that's going to be happening July 22nd to 26th, in Haverhill, Massachusetts, which is a quick, ride on the like regional
The
train.
commuter.
Yeah. I think it's like 45 minutes outside of Boston. It's easy to get to. And yeah, so we're going to be doing that this summer. And there's a Zeffy, a fundraiser page for it. If anyone is interested in supporting the project, we've gotten a bunch of grants and you know, a couple of like local historical, some 250th and some, just kind of I can't remember the name of all of them. They're all on the Zeffy page. But kind of little grants and what's the word I'm looking for? Um, oh my goodness, the words are escaping me. Um, so there's been the fundraising effort has, I mean, we started, putting together like an actual fundraising like effort and campaign starting like last year.
Wow.
And so yeah, we're at I think 70% of our fundraising goal at this point. So
That's
yeah,
awesome. I'll
really
remind you,
exciting.
but will you send me the link so I can include
Yes,
it in the notes below this?
absolutely. Yeah.
Um, that sounds amazing. I
Yeah.
want to try to make it.
Yes, it's really exciting to have it finally like coming to fruition that it's actually going to be happening. And
Yeah.
we're going to do so the other sewists and I are all going to be dressed. We'll do this as like third person interpreting. So we'll be dressed in 18th century clothing and working on the dress and talking to the public as our modern selves discussing, how dressmaking was done and what the kind of process and how it all comes together. So, yeah.
Yeah. I would be so curious to learn more, um, not necessarily today, unless you want to say more about it today, um, about like the process of altering clothing to as the styles change, as fashion changes, and how you can see those alterations in the dress itself. Like, can you see like where in my mind it's kind of like in buildings you can see the different layers of like paint or wallpaper or foundations and things like that. And so I
Yeah.
imagine in dresses, like, is it kind of similar where you can see like the shape of it originally and then how it was altered to fit this new fashion?
Part of it is just kind of knowing, okay, if this dress was made in the 18th century in a certain, decade or kind of stretch of time in the 18th century, I would expect to see these things. And what I'm seeing is not that. I'm seeing, a different method of gathering than I would have expected. Or I'm seeing,
Okay.
kind of like creases in the back of the gown where I think it used to be pleated and now the back is pieced.
Mm-hmm.
So, things like you can kind of see like stitch stitch holes where there used to be thread, especially with silk, like cotton and linen. If you need to take stitches out, you can sometimes like rub the fibers and the stitching holes kind of go away,
Yeah.
but silk tends to retain holes.
Uh-huh.
So you can kind of see like, okay, there were stitches here and now there aren't anymore. So there's a kind of, and some things are more obvious than others. Like this gown has glazed cotton that was added to the hem at one point in the 19th century, because glazed cotton was not really a thing in the 18th century.
Mm.
But it was done when the the style of the dress got changed, and now there was this extra length kind of dragging on the floor. So they added glazed cotton to protect the hem. But
Oh,
in the 18th century, it would have been worn with something like this, which,
right.
keeps it
To
puffed
lift it
up.
up. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And you have you adjust the length from the top of the gown. Like you cut the fabric across the bottom, and then when you're making the skirt, you might allow more length at the back to go over the bum pad and less length at the front.
Right.
So if you weren't wearing the bum pad, it would hang, right? It would drag
Mm-hmm.
on the floor. So you need something to protect the hem. I mean, it's you know, that's one of those things where it's like, oh, this is a fabric that was not available in the 18th century. So it got added later. Other things
Yeah.
are a lot more subtle, like trying to find, where those kind of previous stitch lines or, other kind of style decisions that were made. Um, some of it is just, knowing what to look for, but it's also like just kind of having a sense of like, okay, it should look like this if it's from 1760. And
Yeah.
it looks more like someone in the 1780s when, no, it needs to be this now because save the fabric, make it look new, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah,
That's fascinating.
it's pretty cool to
Um,
be able to like kind of do that detective work. It's fun.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Being able to like deduce what you can just from fabric is
Yeah.
incredible.
I
That
mean,
sounds
as you
really
said, like
fun.
fabric holds on to its stories. Like yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. It's one thing I really love just about studying material culture in general is like there's so much depth that you can read into and figure out from
yeah.
things that people used every day, like
And one of the
textiles.
things for me that was really important in developing this program and the exhibit around it is the the dress is connected to a famous name, right? But there are so many unnamed people involved in the making of a gown.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and there's a lot of uncredited and unnamed and unfree labor that went into making clothes in the 18th century and now today as well. And so being able to say, okay, this thing got saved because it's got a name that people recognize, but what are we missing? Like, what are we
Mm.
not, aware of? What are we not saving? What are we not valuing just because the person who owned it was someone who came and went without a lot of fanfare, you know?
Right.
Um, and especially, in the manufacture of textiles and the shipping and the moving from place to place of textiles and the making of clothing, um, who are we leaving out of those
Yeah.
stories?
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Ah, yeah. Um, well, I know I'm going a little long, but I'm really enjoying our conversation. I'm curious if Abigail could step into the present for an afternoon, what do you imagine she'd notice first, and what might she have to say about the American experiment?
Oh,
How does she think
I
we're
think,
doing?
I think it would be, I was going to say it would be really loud, but life in the 18th century was not quiet and peaceful either.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think the constant noise and, there's very little silence in the modern day. Like it's
Yeah.
really hard to just find silence. And I think that would be jarring. I think that would be, just really the hardest thing for anyone of the past to deal with is just like there's always something beeping or honking or, a siren going by. Like it's very hard to find quiet and,
Hmm.
a place where you can just kind of be with your thoughts, right? I think she would be very I think she would sort of take I think she would look askance at the fact that we have had all this time and things just keep on breaking and, we throw things away and we're not, aware of what we have. I mean, she was so careful about um the use of resources, right? And the, keeping track and, every line, just
Yeah.
making every penny count. And I feel like, the sort of throwaway culture would be very distressing to her.
Hmm.
But I think, yeah, we have made progress. There are, society has come a long way since her time. But I think that she would sort of look at it and go, well, it's not perfect. It's better in a lot of ways for a lot of people, but I don't think it was ever intended to be, the idea was that we could always keep improving, that we could always, that the structures were in place for the United States to constantly strive for better.
Hmm.
And I think she would look at what's happening right now and go, that's not what's happening. I think she would
Hmm.
say it's going backwards because the idea was even if we can't solve slavery and women's rights now, we're putting those, the democratic structure in place to be able to increase people's access and people's involvement and people's voice to make that more representative.
Yeah.
And you know, that's there was a period of time, I think, when those things were getting expanded and were getting broadened and were, more was being done to improve access and representation, and now it's sort of getting narrowed again. And I think she would have a few things to say about that.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree.
I think she would be like, what were we striving for? Like what was this cause that people died for? Um, and people gave up, so much in order to build a more, I mean, like a more perfect union, right? It was to make things ever better, to sort of
Hmm.
keep growing and keep finding ways that we can improve things for Americans. And I think that I think we have as a society sort of lost sight of that.
Yeah.
Not everybody, but a lot of people have.
Enough.
Yeah, enough people have.
Enough people have.
Yeah,
Um, yeah. Yeah, I would agree. I think, the founders created a system that was intended to be flexible enough to continue to evolve and continue
yeah,
to represent the interests of the nation
yeah.
broadly. And
And were not perfect people. They were flawed. They were owners of other people. They had all these, skeletons in their closets.
mhm,
And they still, I think the ideas of trying to strive for better, and again, like making it feasible for people to improve through the democratic structure, right?
right.
That was, there were checks and balances, and there were, certain numbers of representatives so that you couldn't have, the control of everything. And then, so it's very much, I don't think it's entirely hopeless. I think that you know, there are still these structures in place, but it feels more tenuous now.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. I think that's a good word for it, tenuous.
Yeah.
I think
It's like
everybody's
we're
kind of
holding
like,
on by a thread.
what's gonna happen? I do have one more unrelated question to what we were just
Yeah.
talking about. I'm curious how much you study for an event that you're doing.
Oh, that's a
Like,
really
how do
good
you prepare?
question. Yeah. Um, Mostly just going back and kind of verifying, making sure I've got all the basic facts and numbers and dates and things, in there. My memory is terrible these days. So I tend to just have notes for myself of like, here are all the things I want to be sure to say. Um, and, the important stuff is, you know, but, remembering like just making sure that if it's a particular era that I'm, you know, up to speed on, okay, this was happening from 1784 to 1786, or she was in Braintree between these years, or she was, just kind of like refreshing, those specifics. Because, Abigail would know these things, and Sarah's memory is not to be trusted. So, yeah, just kind of brush it up. Yeah.
Okay, that makes
Depending
sense.
on the event. And there's, I've definitely done some events where there was one where I got caught out a little bit. It was years ago. It was years ago. I mean, it was one of those things where someone had, read more about her than even I had at that point. And I was just like, that's an excellent question, and I will think about it.
Oh,
Doesn't happen too often, but there's the ones who like do the like gotcha questions. And I'm like, I
Yeah.
can answer that. Yes.
Do you ever like try to come up with the gotcha questions beforehand to like preempt the gotcha question
I
people?
mean, you can't predict what people are going to ask. It's hard to know. I mean, some people who I think are going to be, the super like academic and they just want to know what was the sweetest thing John ever said to Abigail, like
Oh,
you
that's
never know.
nice.
And that's part of the fun is like the back and forth with the audience. Um, you know, and they're just playing along and it's great. Like
Yeah.
I love that. It's very theatrical in its own way. It's not the same as, doing a theater performance, but it does play into that a lot.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I can see that. I can see how having experience in theater would be really helpful.
Yeah. Yeah.
In part just to like know what to do in moments like that.
Yeah. And just it keeps you on your toes for sure. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Well, this has been really wonderful. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. It's been delightful talking with you.